The Indiana sun baked the driveway as Luke Mendez pulled in 3 hours early. The Johnsons' AC job had taken half the time. 23 years in HVAC gave him that edge. He cut the engine, sweat dripping from his hands, and glanced at the clock, 2:47 p.m. Isabel wasn't expecting him till dinner. Maybe he'd surprise her, take her out. It'd been months. Her car was in the garage. Voices drifted from the backyard. Tess must be home from college again. Luke grabbed his toolbox, thinking of a shower, a cold beer, maybe grilling if the girls were hungry. Routine, family. That was his life. "Mom, seriously, you gotta live a little," Tess said, her voice carrying across the yard as Luke neared the gate, 20 years old and suddenly full of college wisdom. "College opened my eyes, okay? People my age are trying new stuff, different kinds of relationships, figuring things out." Luke paused, hand on the old gate latch. Tess's psych classes had her spouting all kinds of modern ideas about relationships and behavior. Some of it was interesting, sure, but most of it sounded like college talk to a guy like him. Practical things made sense. This stuff didn't. "Honey, marriage isn't college." Isabel's voice was softer, but Luke caught every word. "Your father and I, we have our own way of doing things. We've been together for 22 years. "But are you happy?" Tess pressed. Luke heard water splash. She was moving around in the pool. "Like, really happy? Because there are options. Some couples try open marriages. It's about being honest, exploring stuff you don't always get in a regular relationship." Luke's stomach tightened. Where did kids even get this stuff? He and Isabel had a solid marriage, stable, dependable. They'd built a life, raised a daughter, paid off the house. Wasn't that enough anymore? "What makes you think I haven't already tried that?" The words hit Luke like a pipe wrench to the gut. He froze behind the fence, toolbox suddenly heavier in his hand, sweat turning cold on his brow despite the blazing sun. "Wait, what?" Tess sounded as shocked as Luke felt. "Mom, are you serious? You and Dad have an open marriage?" A splash. Isabel must have jumped in the pool, probably trying to escape the conversation she'd accidentally started. "Forget I said anything, sweetheart." Isabel's voice was muffled by distance and water. "Sometimes mothers say things they shouldn't. Sometimes we speak without thinking." Luke stepped back from the gate, boots quiet on the grass. His hand stayed steady. 23 years in HVAC trained him for that, but his thoughts were spinning. What had Isabel meant? What had she tried? And when? He circled to the front, set his toolbox down on the step, and took 3 slow breaths. Then he pulled out his keys. The lock clicked like always, and he stepped into the cool hush of the AC, his mind anything but calm. "I'm home," he called out, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. "Daddy!" Tess bounded through the sliding patio door, wet hair dripping chlorinated water onto the hardwood floor, throwing her arms around him with the enthusiasm of someone who'd always been Daddy's girl. At 20, she still hugged him like she was 10 years old. "You're early. Mom said you wouldn't be back until dinner time." "Johnson job wrapped up early," Luke said, hugging her and breathing in the mix of chlorine and coconut sunscreen. Over her shoulder, he saw Isabel step out of the pool, water streaming off her still-toned body. 41 and still a knockout. Still the girl he fell for when she was 19 and he was 23, fresh out of the army and chasing something solid to build a life on. "Hey, babe." Isabel grabbed a towel from the patio chair, wrapping it around her waist in a practiced motion. Her smile was warm, genuine, the same smile that had won him over all those years ago. "How was the Johnson place? You said their system was completely screwed up." "Their unit was installed wrong from the start. Previous contractor cut corners, used the wrong gauge wiring, didn't properly seal the ductwork." Luke studied her face, searching for signs of, what exactly? Guilt, lies, secrets? She looked the same as always, beautiful, a little tired around the eyes, content with her life. "It took me an hour to fix what should have been done right the first time." "Well, you're the best at what you do," she said, stepping up to kiss his cheek. Her lips were cool from the pool water. "I was thinking of starting dinner in a bit. Maybe we could grill some chicken. Tess brought home some of that marinade she likes from that place near campus." "Sounds good," Luke said, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Isabel's words from the backyard. "What makes you think I haven't already tried that?" That night, after Tess went to bed in her old room and Isabel settled in with her crime shows, Luke sat alone in the workshop behind the garage. His space, neat, practical, filled with things that made sense, unlike people lately. Supposedly, he was prepping for tomorrow's jobs, sorting gaskets and connectors. In truth, He was just staring at Isabel's old iPhone 12, the one she swapped out 6 months back for the newer model. What makes you think I haven't already tried that? The words echoed in his skull like the sound of a broken compressor motor. Rhythmic, persistent, impossible to ignore. He'd heard wrong. Had to have heard wrong. Isabel wouldn't. They wouldn't, would they? But Luke Mendez hadn't spent 20 years in the trades by ignoring red flags. When something sounded off, you checked. When parts showed stress, you found the cause before things broke for real. When a customer said everything was fine, but the system told a different story, you listened to the system. He powered on Isabel's old phone. She'd handed it over months ago, said he could use it for work since his flip phone was on its last legs, said all her important stuff was already moved to the new one. He never thought to look. The backup restore took 43 minutes. Luke waited, methodically sorting washers and gaskets while his gut twisted in silence. The only sounds were the hum of the AC and distant sirens on the highway. When the phone finally lit up with Isabel's old wallpaper, a Christmas photo of the three of them, his chest tightened. He opened the messages first, all normal at a glance. Work stuff. College talks with Tess, grocery lists, just regular mom and wife texts. He went back further. January, February, March 18th. A text thread with Jared Polk that made Luke's vision blur around the edges. Jared. His buddy since high school. His best man at their wedding 22 years ago. The guy who'd borrowed Luke's work van last month when his truck was in the shop. The guy who came over for weekend barbecues and knew where they kept the spare house key hidden under the fake rock by the front steps. Isabel. Luke hasn't touched me since January. I'm already gone from this marriage. Jared. You deserve so much better than being ignored, You deserve to feel alive again. Isabel. Tonight. Same place as last time. And Jared. Bring those dog tags. I love how they look on you when we're together. Luke's vision blurred. His dog tags, the ones from Afghanistan, with his name, rank, and service number stamped into the metal. Isabel had said she lost them during their last move 3 years ago. He'd worn them through 2 tours, kept them as a reminder of who he was before marriage, before fatherhood. He scrolled up, fingers stiff, weeks of messages, plans, meetups, intimate exchanges that made his stomach clench. Talk about his work hours, how tired he was, how rarely he came to bed. Details only Isabel could have shared. Jared. He's a good provider, I'll give him that. But you need more than just bills paid and a roof over your head. Isabel. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd chosen differently, if I'd been braver when we were young. Jared. You can still choose, baby. Every day, you can choose to be happy instead of just existing. Isabel. When you say things like that, I remember who I used to be before I became just a wife and mother. Luke set the phone down on the bench like it was glass, carefully, precisely. His hand stayed steady. Years of working with delicate parts had drilled that into him. But inside, everything was caving in, like a house with its foundation rotted out from underneath. He walked to his tool cabinet and pulled out the digital voice recorder, the one he used for serial numbers and warranty notes. Small as a thumb drive, sensitive enough to catch voices across a room, enough memory for weeks. Tomorrow, he'd start recording, start watching. Tonight, he'd lie beside the woman he'd loved for 22 years and say nothing, just like he had been, sleeping next to a stranger wearing his wife's face, living a life he clearly knew nothing about. But first, he had a phone call to make. Rodriguez Electronics, we're closed. But if this is an emergency, Carlos, it's Luke Mendez. I need a favor. Something off the books. Carlos Rodriguez had been selling and installing security equipment for 15 years. He'd helped Luke wire his workshop for electrical, and they'd maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and the occasional favor. Sure, Luke, what do you need, Hermano? Keystroke logger, the kind that's completely invisible to the user. Something that captures everything, passwords, messages, search history, and I need it tonight. A long pause. Luke could hear Carlos breathing, probably wondering what his friend had gotten himself into. You sure about this, Luke? That kind of surveillance equipment? Once you know something, you can't unknow it. Sometimes ignorance is a blessing. I'm sure. This is about Isabel. This is about the truth. Another pause. I'll be over in an hour. But Luke, be careful with what you find. Some doors, once you open them, you can never close again. Luke hung up and walked back toward the house through the thick Indiana evening. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights flicking on, TVs murmuring through open windows, a few dogs barking down the block, families settling in, everything looking just as it should. Isabel was asleep on the couch, the TV casting that soft blue glow over her face. She looked peaceful, innocent, like the girl he'd loved at 19, the one who waited for him while he was overseas, the woman who helped him build a life when he came home. She also looked like someone he didn't know at all. 3 days later, while swapping out a heat exchanger in a downtown office building, Luke's phone buzzed, motion alert. The recorder he'd hidden inside the bathroom vent above the toilet had picked something up. She'd never spot it. Only way to reach it was with a screwdriver. He finished the job, told his supervisor he needed to follow up on a delivery, and drove to a McDonald's lot 6 blocks away. The audio file was 2 hours and 17 minutes. He jumped to the motion alert, 10:23 a.m., right when he'd been elbow-deep in ductwork. Isabel's voice, talking on her cell phone. He doesn't know anything, Jared. Luke comes home exhausted every night, eats whatever I put in front of him, falls asleep watching the news. Sometimes I think I could have a whole other family living in the basement and he wouldn't notice. Jared's laugh was tinny through the phone speaker. Maybe we should test that theory. I could move into the guest room. Don't joke about this. I feel guilty enough already without you making it worse. Guilty enough to stop seeing me? A long pause. The sound of running water. Probably Isabel washing dishes or getting ready for work. No, she said finally. Not guilty enough to stop. I can't go back to being invisible in my own life. Luke deleted the file and drove back to the job, hands steady on the wheel, breathing even. That evening, he sat with Tess, helping her work through something on cognitive dissonance for class. Later, he asked Isabel about her day. She talked about quarterly reports, tough clients, and some new software they were rolling out at the firm. Normal stuff, wife stuff. She didn't mention phone calls or guilt or feeling invisible. The keystroke logger was a revelation. Every email Isabel sent, every text message, every Google search, every social media interaction. Isabel Mendez was living 2 completely separate lives, and Luke was documenting both with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent his career solving complex problems. Search: how to tell if your husband suspects you're having an affair. Search: signs that a spouse knows about cheating. Search: Indiana divorce law asset division community property. Search: can a husband claim alienation of affection in Indiana? That last search made Luke froze, every muscle tense. She wasn't just cheating, she was researching her legal position, planning her exit strategy, preparing for the eventual explosion. On Friday afternoon, Isabel collapsed. Luke had just walked in from a service call, was hanging his keys on the hook by the garage door, when he heard the crash from the kitchen, the sound of dishes hitting the floor, followed by a heavy thud that could only be a human body. By the time he rounded the corner, Isabel was on the kitchen floor, convulsing violently, eyes rolled back, foam at the corners of her mouth. Her whole body was rigid, back-arched, hands clenched into fists. "Call 911 Inch!" He shouted to Tess, who had appeared in the doorway and was frozen in shock. Luke dropped to his knees beside his wife, his military first aid training kicking in automatically. Check the airway. Turn her on her side to prevent choking. Protect her head from hitting the cabinets. Isabel? Isabel, can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, completely unfocused and strange. Pupils dilated. No recognition. She tried to speak, but only managed garbled sounds like someone trying to talk with a mouthful of cotton. "Mom!" Tess was crying, cell phone pressed to her ear with shaking hands. "Yes, we need an ambulance. My mom collapsed in the kitchen. She's conscious, but she can't talk right. She's making weird sounds." The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. Luke timed them automatically, a habit from his military days. They wheeled in their equipment, asked rapid-fire questions while checking Isabel's vitals and starting an IV. Any recent illness? Changes in behavior? New medications? History of seizures? "She's been tired lately," Luke said, riding in the ambulance while they worked on his wife. "Working extra hours at the accounting firm, but nothing like this. She's never had seizures." "Any pills use? Booze? Head trauma recently?" "No pills, maybe a glass of wine with dinner. No head injuries that I know of." At the hospital, they wheeled Isabel into the emergency room while Luke and Tess waited in the family area. The space was designed to be calming, soft lighting, muted colors, comfortable chairs. But it felt like a holding cell for people whose lives were falling apart. Tess paced back and forth, tears streaming down her face, still wearing the college t-shirt and sweatpants she'd thrown on when she heard the commotion. "This is my fault," she whispered, more to herself than to Luke. "All that pressure I put on her yesterday about marriage and happiness and trying new things. I made her feel like what you guys had wasn't enough. I made her think she was missing out on something. Luke pulled his daughter close, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. This isn't anyone's fault, sweetheart. Sometimes people just get sick. Sometimes bodies malfunction for reasons nobody can predict. But even as he said the words, Luke's mind was racing through possibilities. The timeline of events, the symptoms he'd witnessed, the sudden onset of neurological distress. He'd seen enough military medical training videos to recognize the signs of systemic infection affecting the nervous system. Dr. Keene found them 3 hours later, clipboard in hand, and the grave expression of someone delivering life-changing news. Your wife has a bacterial infection that's affecting her nervous system, the doctor explained, settling into the chair across from them. It's treatable with antibiotics, but we need to determine the source of the infection. These particular types of bacteria can be transmitted through close contact. Luke felt like an icy dread crept over him. Close contact? Yes. We'll need to test both of you to rule out that possibility and determine the appropriate treatment protocol. When was your last sex with your wife? Tess was staring at her father, confusion and something else. Suspicion? Fear? Creeping across her young face. January, Luke said quietly. We haven't since January. The doctor made a note on his clipboard. I see. And has your wife mentioned any other partners recently? Any changes in her social circle or behavior patterns? Other partners? Tess's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Doctor, my parents are married. They don't have other partners. They've been together for over 20 years. Luke said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. The test results came back on Monday morning. Luke was completely clean. No infections, no diseases, no evidence of exposure to anything dangerous. Isabel's infection, however, was advanced and aggressive, suggesting exposure sometime in early to mid-March based on the bacterial load and progression of symptoms. Luke sat in Dr. Keene's office, staring at the medical timeline that proved what he already knew, but had been hoping against hope wasn't true. His wife had been intimate with someone else, someone who'd given her a bacterial infection that was slowly destroying her nervous system and cognitive function. Mr. Mendez, I need to ask some difficult questions, Dr. Keene said, leaning forward with the practiced empathy of someone who'd delivered bad news thousands of times. Has your wife exhibited any behavioral changes recently? Memory loss, confusion, uncharacteristic decisions, or mood swings? She's been distant since January. We both have, actually. Luke thought about the extra shifts, the exhaustion, the way their bedroom had become just a place to sleep instead of a place to connect. I was working night shifts to help pay for our daughter's off-campus apartment. Tess wanted to move out of the dorms, and the rent was significant, more than we'd budgeted for. How many nights per week were you working these extra shifts? 4 nights, sometimes 5. Big commercial installations pay overtime rates, and Tess needed the money for her psychology program and living expenses. Dr. Keene nodded sympathetically. Financial stress can put tremendous strain on relationships, especially when it requires physical separation. Sometimes people seek emotional or physical connection elsewhere when their primary relationship feels distant or neglected. Luke almost laughed at the clinical language. Distant, neglected, as if Isabel's betrayal was somehow his fault for working himself to exhaustion to give their daughter the college experience she wanted. The infection is treatable with aggressive antibiotic therapy, Dr. Keene continued. But there may be lasting neurological effects depending on how long she was exposed and how far the infection has progressed. Memory issues, cognitive changes, personality shifts. We'll know more as the treatment progresses. That afternoon, Luke drove to Tess's off-campus apartment complex, a modern building with amenities that cost more per month than Luke's first house payment. She was waiting on the front steps, psychology textbooks scattered around her like fallen leaves, still wearing yesterday's clothes. I talked to Mom this morning, she said without preamble, not even waiting for Luke to get out of his truck. She couldn't remember why she was in the hospital. She asked me 3 times what day it was. Dad, what's really going on? The doctors aren't telling me everything. Luke sat down beside his daughter on the concrete steps. At 20 years old, she deserved honesty. Most of it, anyway. Your mother has a bacterial infection, the kind that comes from intimate contact with someone who's already infected. Tess stared at him, her psychology textbook sliding off her lap onto the sidewalk. Are you saying Mom cheated on you? I'm saying the medical evidence speaks for itself. The timeline doesn't lie. But you two seemed fine. I mean, not perfect, but solid, stable. Like the kind of couple that works through problems instead of running away from them. Tess's voice was rising, attracting attention from other students walking past. This doesn't make sense. Mom isn't that kind of person. She's not impulsive or reckless or... People aren't always who we think they are, sweetheart. Sometimes the people we trust most are living completely different lives than the ones we see. Don't. Tess stood up abruptly, textbooks falling everywhere. Don't you dare make this about her character or her morals. Maybe if you'd paid attention to your wife instead of working yourself to end for my stupid apartment, she wouldn't have felt so alone and invisible. The accusation hit Luke like a physical blow. He looked up at his daughter, his brilliant, idealistic daughter who still believed in fairy tale endings and the power of love to conquer all obstacles. You think this is my fault? I think marriages require two people who are present and engaged, and you've been physically here but emotionally absent for months. Tess was crying now, angry tears that spoke to deeper pain. Mom used to talk about how proud she was of your work ethic and dedication to providing for us. But lately she just seemed sad. Lost, like she was going through the motions of being a wife without feeling like one. Luke stood up slowly, his knees creaking from too many years crawling through tight spaces. Your mother made choices, Tess. Adult choices with adult consequences. I worked extra hours so you could have everything you wanted for college. Apparently, that was a mistake. He walked back to his truck, leaving his daughter sitting on the steps. In the rearview mirror, he watched her sink back down, head in her hands, textbooks scattered around her like the remnants of her shattered worldview. That evening, Luke drove past Jared's house for the first time since discovering the text messages. The building inspector lived alone in a small ranch-style home about 15 minutes away, the kind of modest place Luke had helped wire for central air when Jared first bought it 12 years ago. His black pickup truck was in the driveway, lights on in the living room, everything looking normal and innocent. Luke parked at the corner under a broken streetlight and scrolled through Isabel's recovered messages on his phone. March 18th was the first explicitly sexual reference, but the emotional affair went back much further. December, November. Right around the time Luke had started picking up those extra night shifts to pay for Tess's spring semester. November 15th. Jared. You looked absolutely beautiful at Thanksgiving dinner yesterday. Luke's a lucky man to have a wife like you. Isabel. Sometimes I don't think he sees me anymore. I feel like I've become invisible in my own house. Jared. I see you, Iz. I've always seen you, even back in high school. You were the girl every guy wanted, but nobody was brave enough to approach. Isabel. We were kids then. Everything seemed possible when we were 17. Jared. Some things are still possible. It's never too late to feel alive again. November. While Luke had been working double shifts and sleeping 4 hours a night to save money for Tess's spring tuition and apartment deposit, his wife and his best friend had been laying the emotional groundwork for complete betrayal. Luke's phone rang, startling him out of his surveillance. Hospital number. Mr. Mendez, your wife is asking for you. She's somewhat agitated and confused. The nursing staff thinks a familiar face might help calm her down. Luke found Isabel sitting up in her hospital bed, looking around the room like she didn't recognize anything. The harsh fluorescent lighting made her skin look pale and waxy. When she saw him, her face brightened with relief and something that looked almost like gratitude. Luke, thank God you're here. Where are we? Why am I in this place? Why can't I remember anything? You're in the hospital, Iz. You collapsed Friday afternoon in our kitchen. Don't you remember any of it? She shook her head vigorously, then winced as if the movement caused pain. Friday? What day is it now? Monday evening. You've been here for 3 days. I lost 3 entire days? Isabel looked genuinely frightened, her hands shaking as she reached for the water glass on her bedside table. Luke, I can't remember anything since Thursday morning when I was getting ready for work. I was making coffee in the kitchen, listening to the morning news, and then nothing. Complete blackness until I woke up here. Luke studied his wife's face carefully. The confusion and fear seemed completely genuine. The infection was affecting her memory and cognitive function, just like Dr. Keene had warned. But how much was medical, and how much was performance? The doctors say you have a bacterial infection, something that's affecting your nervous system and brain function. A bacterial infection? From what? How did I get infected with something like that? Luke hesitated, watching Isabel's face for any flicker of recognition or guilt. She looked so vulnerable lying there in the hospital gown, so scared and confused. For a moment, she was just his wife again, the woman he'd loved for over 2 decades, the partner who'd helped him transition from military life to civilian life, the mother who'd raised their daughter with patience and wisdom. "The doctors are still running tests to figure that out," he said finally. Isabel reached for his hand with both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'm scared, Luke. Really scared. What if I can't remember things anymore? What if I forget important stuff? What if I forget you or Tess or our whole life together?" "We'll get through this," Luke said automatically, the words feeling hollow and meaningless in his mouth. "The doctors say the infection is treatable with antibiotics." "I love you," Isabel whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I know we've been distant lately with your work schedule and everything that's been stressing us out, but I love you. You know that, right? You know that whatever problems we've had, I've never stopped loving you?" Luke squeezed her hand and said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things he couldn't say, all the evidence he'd collected, all the betrayals he'd documented. Later that night, while Isabel slept under medical supervision, Luke sat in the hospital parking garage and opened her laptop computer. The keystroke logger had been capturing everything for 5 days now. Every email, every social media interaction, every private message, every Google search. There was a hidden folder buried deep in her photo library, mislabeled as work files, miscellaneous tax documents. Luke almost missed it, but 23 years of systematic troubleshooting had taught him to check everything, even the things that seemed innocent. He opened the folder and immediately wished he hadn't. The first image was a selfie. Isabel and Jared in what looked like a cheap motel room. She was wearing Luke's army dog tags and nothing else, her body positioned provocatively against Jared's chest. Jared was behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, both of them grinning at the camera like teenagers who'd gotten away with something forbidden. Luke scrolled through 24 photos spanning several months. Different motels, different dates, same fundamental betrayal. In one image, Jared was wearing Luke's old army t-shirt, the one with his unit patch still sewn on the sleeve. In another, Isabel was holding a bottle of wine Luke recognized from their 20th anniversary dinner, the expensive bottle they'd been saving for a special occasion. The final photo was time-stamped March 20th, just 2 days after Isabel's text about feeling already gone from their marriage. It showed them lying in bed together afterward, Isabel's head resting on Jared's bare chest, both of them laughing at something off camera. They looked comfortable together, familiar, like a couple who'd been intimate many times before. Luke closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of the parking garage, listening to the sound of cars and sirens and helicopters in the distance. 22 years of marriage, 2 decades of trust, partnership, shared dreams, and mutual sacrifice. Gone. All of it gone. Replaced by lies and performance art and betrayal so complete, it felt like discovering his entire life had been an elaborate practical joke. But not forgotten. Luke Mendez was very good at documentation, very good at following systematic procedures, very good at seeing complex projects through to completion, no matter how long they took or how difficult they became. This project was just getting started. Luke installed the surveillance cameras himself over the course of 3 days. 23 years in HVAC meant he knew how to run wiring through tight spaces without leaving visible traces, how to access areas other people couldn't reach, how to hide equipment where only a professional would think to look. The work van Jared had borrowed last month gave Luke the perfect opportunity. 2 tiny cameras with motion activation and GPS tracking capability, plus a GPS locator beacon, all hidden in locations that would require tearing apart the vehicle's interior to discover. The footage was enlightening in ways that made Luke's stomach turn. Wednesday night, 11:47 p.m. Jared's black pickup truck parked 3 blocks from Luke's house, hidden behind a cluster of maple trees where the streetlight had been burned out for months. Timestamp showed he stayed until 2:15 a.m., then drove directly home. Thursday afternoon, 3:22 p.m., Jared at Isabel's office building downtown, entering through the back employee entrance using what appeared to be a key card. 37 minutes later, he emerged, adjusting his clothes and checking his watch. Friday morning, 6:45 a.m., Jared leaving the same office building through the same back door, this time carrying what looked like a small overnight bag. His hair was disheveled, and he was wearing different clothes than when he'd entered the night before. Luke watched the playback in his workshop, the images grainy but clear enough to tell the story. His wife's affair wasn't just ongoing. It was structured, planned, systematic. They had developed routines, systems, protocols. They were operating like a couple, not like guilty lovers sneaking around. The audio recordings from the bathroom were even more damaging. Isabel's voice, talking to Jared on her cell phone while Luke was supposedly at work. The infection is scary, but honestly, at least I can't remember most of the last week. It's like having a break from the guilt and the constant worry about getting caught. Maybe your brain is protecting you from trauma, Jared's voice crackled through the speaker. Like a psychological defense mechanism. Or maybe it's punishment for what I've done. Luke keeps asking if I remember anything unusual from the past few weeks. He has this look in his eyes sometimes, like he knows something, but he's waiting for me to admit it. Luke doesn't know anything concrete. He's a good man, but he's not naturally suspicious or paranoid. That's what makes him easy to... The line went quiet for several seconds. Easy to what? Isabel asked. Nothing. Forget I said anything. I'm just saying he trusts people, which is admirable but naive. Luke rewound the segment and played it again. Easy to what? Easy to fool? Easy to betray? Easy to destroy? The unfinished sentence felt more ominous than anything Jared might have actually said. He was pondering the implications when his phone rang. Tess. And her voice sounded terrible. Dad, I feel awful. Really, really sick. What's wrong, sweetheart? I woke up dizzy and nauseous. My head is pounding like someone's hitting it with a hammer, and I can barely stand up without falling over. Can you take me to urgent care? I'm scared to drive like this. Terror shot through Luke's chest like ice water. The infection. Isabel's bacterial infection. What if it was more contagious than the doctors thought? What if Jared had somehow exposed Tess to it as well? What if his daughter? The thought that followed was too horrible to complete, but Luke's mind went there anyway. Jared had offered to help Tess move furniture from her dorm to the apartment last month. They'd spent an entire afternoon together, just the two of them, while Luke was installing a commercial unit across town and Isabel was supposedly at work. But what if Isabel hadn't been at work that day? What if she'd been with Jared and Tess had been... I'll be right there, Luke said, already grabbing his keys. I don't try to do anything until I get there. Luke drove to Tess's apartment complex doing 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, his mind racing through increasingly horrific possibilities. Isabel's infection was contact transmitted. If Jared was capable of betraying his best friend's marriage, was he capable of targeting an innocent 20-year-old college student? Was he the kind of hunter who would exploit a young woman's trust and gratitude? He found Tess curled up on her apartment couch, pale and shivering despite the warm temperature. She looked terrible. Skin clammy, eyes unfocused, movements sluggish and uncoordinated. How long have you felt like this? Luke asked, helping her stand and walk to his truck. Since I woke up this morning. Maybe longer. I had weird dreams all night. Tess leaned heavily against him as they walked. Dad, what if I have what Mom has? What if whatever infected her is contagious in ways the doctors don't understand? We'll find out, Luke said grimly. We'll get you tested for everything. The urgent care center was moderately busy with the usual collection of minor injuries and illnesses. They triaged Tess quickly due to her neurological symptoms and her family history of recent bacterial infection. Luke paced the waiting room like a caged animal, checking his phone obsessively for new recordings or GPS alerts. When had Jared last been around Tess? Luke forced himself to think systematically, to treat this like a technical problem requiring logical analysis. Last month's family barbecue. Jared had offered to help Tess move some furniture and boxes from her dorm room to the new apartment. They'd spent the afternoon together, just the two of them, while Luke was across town installing a new commercial HVAC system, and Isabel was... Luke pulled up the photo timestamps on his phone, March 22nd, the day Tess had moved out of the dorms. According to the hidden photos, Isabel and Jared had been together at a motel that exact same afternoon while Luke was working, and Tess was supposedly getting help moving furniture. But what if the timeline was different? What if Jared had been with Tess first, then met Isabel later? What if... Mr. Mendez. The doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway, clipboard in hand and a reassuring expression on his face. Your daughter is going to be fine. She has a viral infection, probably something she picked up at college or from another student. Very common this time of year with stress and irregular sleep patterns. She needs rest fluids and probably some better nutrition, but she'll recover completely in a few days. The relief nearly dropped Luke to his knees. His legs actually wobbled, and he had to grab the back of a chair for support. You're absolutely sure it's not bacterial, not personal transmitted, not related to what my wife has? The doctor looked puzzled. No, sir. This is a completely standard viral infection. Nothing serious or unusual about it. Probably picked it up from a classmate or in a dormitory common area. Luke nodded, unable to speak for several seconds. In the truck, Tess leaned against the passenger window, looking miserable but safe. Dad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost or something. Luke started the engine with hands that were finally steady again. Just worried about you, sweetheart. Parents worry when their kids get sick. But as they drove back to her apartment, Luke's relief was gradually replaced by a darker realization. For those 3 hours in the urgent care waiting room, he had genuinely believed that Jared Polk, his best friend since high school, his daughter's godfather, a man he'd trusted completely for over 25 years, was capable of damaging Tess. Not just emotionally or psychologically, but physically, intimately. The fact that Luke could even conceive of such a thing meant that Jared was already dead to him. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. The friendship was over. The trust was gone. The man Luke had considered a brother was now nothing more than a target for consequences. The only question now was how far Luke was willing to go to make those consequences real and permanent. That night, Luke sat in his workshop listening to the latest batch of audio recordings. Isabel was home from the hospital, supposedly resting and recovering. But her conversations with Jared suggested she was faking more of the memory loss than the doctors realized. I can't keep pretending I don't remember things. Isabel's voice was tired and defeated. Luke watches me constantly now. Every time I say something, he analyzes it like he's looking for lies. I feel like I'm under surveillance in my own house. Maybe we should cool things off for a while, Jared suggested. Just until your health stabilizes and things calm down at home. I can't lose you now. Not when I've already lost everything else that mattered to me. You haven't lost everything, Iz. Your marriage was already over before we got together. Luke checked out months ago. Haven't I lost everything, though? My marriage is a lie built on 20 years of settling for less than I deserved. My daughter thinks I'm weak and pathetic. My husband looks at me like I'm a stranger he's obligated to take care of. You're the only thing in my life that makes me feel like a real person, instead of just a collection of roles and responsibilities. Then we'll figure this out. We always do. Luke stopped the recording and sat in the silence of his workshop. We always do. How long had this been going on? How many of his memories were contaminated by lies? How many family dinners and holidays and anniversaries had been nothing but performance art? He walked to his computer and opened a new document. Time to stop collecting evidence and start using it strategically. The civil lawsuit took shape over the next 4 hours of research and drafting. Alienation of affection. Indiana Revised Code 341221. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Conspiracy to commit infidelity. Criminal conversation. Indiana was one of only 6 states that still recognized these legal theories, and Luke intended to use every single one of them. But a lawsuit was just paperwork. Legal consequences were just money and public embarrassment. Luke wanted something more immediate, more personal, more satisfying than watching lawyers argue in a sterile courtroom. He opened his phone contacts and scrolled to Carlos Rodriguez. Carlos, it's Luke. I need something else, something with more punch than surveillance equipment. Hermano, you're starting to scare me. What exactly are you planning here? I'm planning to end this situation permanently. Complete resolution with lasting consequences. Luke, whatever you're thinking about doing, be very careful. Revenge has a way of destroying the person seeking it just as thoroughly as the people who deserve it. I'm already destroyed, Carlos. Now, I'm just returning the favor in kind. What do you need? Information? Background checks? Financial records? Employment history? Everything there is to know about Jared Polk's professional activities for the past 2 years? That's extensive and expensive. Money isn't an issue. I want to know every corner he's cut, every rule he's bent, every favor he's traded. I want to know where the bodies are buried. Give me a week. Luke hung up and walked back to the house. Isabel was asleep in their bed, where she'd been lying to him for months while planning her escape with his best friend. The room smelled like her shampoo and the antibiotics she was taking for the infection Jared had given her. He stood in the doorway watching her sleep, thinking about 22 years of marriage and how quickly it could all become meaningless. Tomorrow, he would start the process of systematic destruction. Tonight, he would lie next to his wife one last time and say goodbye to the man he used to be, the man who trusted people, the man who believed in loyalty and commitment and the basic decency of human beings. That man was about to disappear forever. The process server found Jared at a downtown job site on a Tuesday morning, installing electrical systems for a new office complex. Luke watched from his truck across the street as Jared read through the legal papers, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked like genuine fear. The lawsuit was comprehensive and devastating. $500,000 in compensatory damages for alienation of affection under Indiana Code 34-1221. Additional damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, conspiracy to defraud Luke of his marriage, and criminal conversation. Attached as exhibits were photos, text message transcripts, audio recordings, timeline documentation, medical records proving bacterial infection acquired through close personal contact, and financial statements showing how Jared had used Luke's credit cards to pay for motel rooms. Jared looked around the construction site, spotted Luke's distinctive HVAC truck parked across the street, and started walking over with the papers clutched in his fist. Luke rolled down his window as Jared approached, his face red with anger and what looked like embarrassment. What the hell is this supposed to be? Jared waved the legal documents like they were on fire. You can't sue someone for infidelity. This isn't the 1950s. Actually, I can, Luke said calmly, his voice steady and professional. Indiana is one of 6 states that still recognizes alienation of affection as a legitimate civil tort. You deliberately interfered with my marriage for the purpose of destroying the relationship. That's a legally actionable offense with monetary damages. Jared stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Luke, we've been friends for 25 years, since high school. I was your best man, for Christ's sake. Friends don't screw each other's wives in motel rooms while wearing each other's dog tags. Look, what happened between Isabel and me? It just evolved naturally. We didn't plan it or scheme about it. She was lonely, I was available, and things just happened. Luke pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Jared's voice saying, "You deserve so much better than being ignored is. You deserve to feel alive again." Jared went pale. You recorded our private conversations? I documented evidence of ongoing criminal activity, times, dates, locations, financial expenditures. Did you know you used my backup credit card to pay for the motel room on March 18th? The card Isabel keeps for emergencies? Using someone else's credit card without permission is theft, which is a felony in Indiana. I'll fight this lawsuit. I'll get a lawyer and fight every single charge. With what money? Luke smiled for the first time in weeks, and it felt strange on his face. You're about to be unemployed, remember? Jared frowned, genuine confusion replacing the anger. What are you talking about? Luke pulled a manila folder from his passenger seat and handed it through the window. I contacted the Indiana Professional Licensing Agency. Turns out building inspectors who falsify safety reports can lose their certification permanently. Remember the Henderson construction project last year? The one where you passed electrical work that wasn't up to code because the contractor was your buddy Tommy? You have no proof of that. I have photos of the code violations, copies of your signed approval documents, and witness testimony from 2 other contractors who saw Tommy hand you an envelope full of cash in the parking lot afterward. Luke wasn't lying. Carlos had been thorough in his investigation. The disciplinary hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. The criminal fraud charges will be filed by Thursday. Jared stepped back from the truck like Luke had just pulled a piece. You're destroying my entire life over a woman. I'm holding you accountable for destroying mine first. There's a difference. Isabel was miserable in her marriage. She told me she felt invisible, unappreciated, taken for granted. When's the last time you looked at her like she mattered? When's the last time you made her feel beautiful or desired or valued? When's the last time you acted like a friend instead of a hunter? The conversation was getting heated, and other workers at the construction site were starting to notice. Jared glanced around nervously, obviously aware that his professional reputation was already hanging by a thread. This is insane, Luke. You're going to bankrupt me, destroy my career, and ruin my life over something that has nothing to do with you anymore. It has everything to do with me. She's my wife. Those were my dog tags you wore while you were with her. That was my credit card you used to pay for your little adventures. That was my trust you violated and my friendship you betrayed. Luke started his truck engine. See you in court, buddy. That evening, Jared showed up at Luke's house unannounced. Luke was in the garage working on his truck's transmission, partly because it needed attention and partly because he wanted to be alone with his thoughts. The overhead door was open to let in the cooler evening air. "We need to talk," Jared said, stepping into the garage without invitation. Luke didn't look up from the engine bay. "Talk? This lawsuit is completely insane. You're going to financially destroy me over something that really doesn't concern you anymore." "Doesn't concern me?" Luke finally turned around, wrench still in his hand. "She's my wife. Was your wife. Past tense. When's the last time you two actually acted like married people instead of roommates splitting expenses? When's the last time you looked at her with love instead of obligation?" Luke set down his wrench on the workbench with deliberate care. "When's the last time you acted like a friend instead of a vulture circling someone else's life?" "I was being a friend." Isabel was miserable, Luke, genuinely miserable. She felt invisible in her own house, unappreciated by her own husband. She needed someone to see her as a woman instead of just a wife and mother going through the motions. "So you decided to be that someone?" "I decided to be there for her when you were too busy working to notice she was drowning. Something you stopped doing months ago when you started treating your marriage like a business partnership." Luke walked toward the workbench, his back to Jared. "You know what's really funny about this whole situation? I was working all those extra hours to pay for Tessa's apartment. 60 hours a week so our daughter could have everything she needed for college. I thought I was being a good father and a good provider. You were being an absent husband. And that gave you permission to take my place in my own marriage? I didn't take anything. You abandoned it. You checked out emotionally and left Isabel to figure out how to be happy on her own." Luke spun around faster than Jared expected. The first punch caught him squarely in the solar plexus, doubling him over and driving all the air from his lungs. Luke had been holding back rage for months, keeping it contained and controlled and channeled into legal proceedings. But seeing Jared standing in his garage, in his space, justifying betrayal as friendship, it all erupted at once. The second punch straightened Jared up and sent him stumbling backward into the tool cabinet. Wrenches and screwdrivers and electrical components crashed to the concrete floor in a cascade of metal. 25 years. Luke grabbed Jared by his shirt and slammed him against the garage wall hard enough to rattle the hanging tools. 25 years of friendship. Jared swung back wildly, catching Luke on the jaw, but Luke barely felt it. He drove his knee into Jared's ribs. "My dog tags." Luke kicked him again, this time targeting the kidney area. "You wore my army dog tags while you screwed my wife in cheap motel rooms." Jared collapsed to his knees on the oil-stained concrete. "Luke, stop, please." But Luke couldn't stop. 23 years of being the reasonable one, the steady one. It was all pouring out in a torrent of fury. He grabbed a pipe wrench from the scattered tools on the floor and raised it over his head like a club. Jared's eyes went wide with genuine terror. "Dad, no!" Tessa's voice cut through the red haze of rage like a knife. Luke froze with the wrench still raised, breathing hard, and turned to see his daughter standing in the garage doorway. She was wearing pajamas and flip-flops, hair messy like she'd just woken up from a nap. "Put it down," she said quietly, but with the kind of authority that came from years of being the voice of reason in their family. "Please, put it down right now." Luke looked at the pipe wrench in his hand, then at Jared bleeding and gasping on the garage floor. The rage drained out of him like water from a broken pipe, leaving him feeling empty and strangely cold. He dropped the wrench. It hit the concrete with a loud clang that seemed to echo forever. "I'm calling 911, Tess said, already pulling out her phone. "Wait," Luke said, but she was already dialing. Behind him, Jared was struggling to stand up, using the workbench for support. His lip was split, and he was holding his ribs like they might be cracked. The police arrived in 22 minutes. Officer Hall was young, professional, and looked tired in the way that suggested she'd seen too many domestic disputes and family violence calls. "Mr. Mendez," she said, approaching Luke while her partner checked on Jared. "Mr. Polk says you attacked him without provocation. He claims he came here to discuss a civil matter, and you attacked him." "That's not true," Tess interrupted before Luke could respond. "Jared came here to intimidate my dad about a lawsuit. He was trespassing on our property and threatening my father. Dad was defending himself." Luke looked at his daughter in surprise. The security camera in the garage corner would show the truth, that Luke had thrown the first punch and escalated the confrontation to violence. But Tess was protecting him, lying to the police to keep him out of jail. "Is that accurate, Mr. Mendez?" Officer Hall asked. Luke met Jared's eyes across the garage. Even knocking, there was still defiance there. Still the attitude of someone who believed he was entitled to take whatever he wanted from other people's lives. He trespassed on my property without permission and threatened me over a legitimate civil lawsuit, Luke said carefully. I defended myself when he became physically aggressive. Jared started to protest, but Officer Hall cut him off. Sir, you're on private property without the owner's permission. That constitutes criminal trespassing under Indiana law. If you initiated any kind of physical contact, that's battery. I want him arrested. Jared pointed at Luke with a shaking hand. He could have ended me with that wrench. This was attempted homicide. With what evidence? Officer Hall glanced around the garage. Tools scattered, gear overturned. All I see is a homeowner defending his property from someone who, by your own words, showed up to confront him over a legal issue. You don't have the right to step onto someone's property and try to intimidate them. Jared was arrested for trespassing and physical aggression. Luke watched from the kitchen window as they cuffed him and led him to the patrol car, shirt torn, face bruised, still marked from the knocking. Thank you, Luke said to Tess after the police left. Don't thank me yet, she replied, her voice colder than he'd ever heard it. We need to talk about Mom, and about what you're turning into. Luke found Isabel in their bedroom, slowly packing a suitcase with the careful movements of someone whose balance and coordination were still affected by neurological damage. Her hands shook slightly as she folded clothes, and she had to sit down every few minutes to rest. Going somewhere? Luke asked from the doorway. My sister's house in Columbus. Carol said I can stay as long as I need to. Isabel didn't look at him as she spoke. I need space to think, and you need space to figure out what you want to do with your life. What I want is my life back. The life I had before I discovered you were living a lie. Isabel sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the suitcase half-packed beside her. Our life was broken long before Jared entered the picture, Luke. I made it infinitely worse by trying to fix my loneliness in the worst possible way. You made it worse by lying, by betraying everything we built together. I made it worse by being weak and selfish and cowardly. Tears were running down Isabel's face, but her voice remained steady. You deserve better than a wife who felt invisible. Tess deserved better than a mother who was so desperate for attention that she destroyed her family for it. Luke stared at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. The infection and stress had aged her dramatically, leaving her gaunt and fragile looking. But underneath the illness and exhaustion, he could still see traces of the woman he'd married. Scared, guilty, broken, but still recognizable. Isabel, don't try to fix this, she said, holding up her hand to stop him. I know what I did. I know what I destroyed. The lawsuit, the public scandal, Jared getting arrested, the whole neighborhood talking about our business. I deserve all of it and more. She stood up slowly, swaying slightly, and Luke instinctively reached out to steady her. The house is yours, she continued. The bank accounts, the cars, everything. I don't want anything except the chance to disappear and maybe figure out how to live with what I've done. What about Tess? Tess will never forgive me, and maybe she shouldn't. Maybe that's what I get for putting my own selfish wants above her stability. Isabel gripped her suitcase with both hands, struggling with the weight. I'm sorry, Luke, for all of it. The lies, the cheating, the betrayal, the infection, for tearing apart everything good we had. You were a good man, a good husband, just trying to take care of us. And I threw it all away. She walked slowly toward the bedroom door, careful with each step. At the threshold, she turned once more. I hope one day you can forgive me. Not for me, for you. Because holding on to all that anger, it'll break you, the same way I broke what we had. Luke watched her walk down the hallway, heard her car start in the driveway, listened to the sound fade into the distance. 22 years of marriage ended with an apology and a suitcase. But for Luke, it wasn't over, not even close. Jared Polk's downfall unfolded with the precision of a military op. The civil suit pressed forward while criminal charges stacked up. The licensing board moved to strip his inspector credentials. The fraud probe widened to every job he'd touched in 3 years. Luke was there for all of it. Hearings, depositions, court dates, watching his former best friend's life collapse with the same focus he brought to complicated HVAC systems. In 6 months, Jared looked 10 years older, hair gone gray, face sunken. His house foreclosed, his truck repossessed, and whatever friends he had left quietly disappeared as the scandal closed in. At the final settlement conference, Jared approached Luke in the courthouse hallway. He looked like a ghost of his former self. Thin, pale, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit properly. "I hope you're satisfied with your handiwork," Jared said, his voice hoarse and defeated. "You got everything you wanted. I wanted my marriage back. I wanted my wife alive and healthy. I wanted my daughter to respect me. I wanted my best friend to be someone I could trust." Luke straightened his tie with mechanical precision. "What I got was justice." "Justice? Isabel is dead. I'm homeless and unemployed, and your daughter won't speak to you. How exactly is that justice?" Luke considered the question with the same analytical approach he brought to technical problems. "You stole my life and destroyed my family. Now you don't have a life either. That seems proportionate. We were friends for 25 years. "No," Luke said quietly. "I was your friend for 25 years. You were just someone pretending to be mine while waiting for an opportunity to take what I had." Jared walked away, and Luke never saw him again. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in June. Isabel had collapsed at her sister's house in Columbus, Ohio. Massive seizure brought on by brain swelling, complications from the bacterial infection she'd been fighting for months. The doctors had done everything possible, but the damage was too extensive. She died without regaining consciousness, alone, except for her sister, in a hospital room 300 miles from home. Luke drove to Ohio in complete silence, with Tess crying in the passenger seat. They handled the arrangements together: cremation, small memorial service, no flowers by request. Isabel's sister, Carol, blamed Luke for everything: the stress of the lawsuit, the public humiliation, the financial pressure that had supposedly weakened Isabel's immune system and made the infection fatal. She was getting better, Carol insisted during the tense conversation in the funeral home. The doctors in Columbus said the infection was responding well to treatment. Her cognitive function was improving. Then you had to drag her through those court proceedings, destroy her reputation, ruin what was left of her life. "I didn't ruin her life," Luke said quietly, signing the cremation paperwork with steady hands. "She did that herself when she decided to have an affair with my best friend. She made one mistake out of loneliness and desperation, and you punished her like she'd committed homicide. She made months of deliberate choices, adult decisions with adult consequences." The memorial service was small and awkward. A dozen of Isabel's co-workers from the accounting firm, her sister, and a few distant relatives, some neighbors who came out of obligation rather than genuine grief. Notably absent was Jared Polk, who was prohibited by a restraining order from attending. Luke stood at the back of the chapel, watching his wife's life reduced to 20 minutes of generic prayers and carefully sanitized memories. No one mentioned the affair. No one talked about the lies or the betrayal or the infection that had ultimately claimed her life. They made Isabel sound like a devoted wife and mother who'd been tragically struck down by random illness. The sanitized version of the truth. The story people preferred to believe. After the service, Tess confronted him in the funeral home parking lot. "Are you satisfied now?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "Is this what you wanted? Mom is dead. And for what? Your wounded pride? Your need for revenge? I wanted accountability for choices and consequences for actions. You wanted revenge. You systematically destroyed two people over something that could have been resolved with marriage counseling and honest communication." Tess was shaking with anger and grief. "You turned into someone I don't recognize. Someone cold and calculating and cruel." Luke looked at his daughter, his brilliant, idealistic daughter, who still believed the world was supposed to be fair and that love could conquer any obstacle. "I became practical. Practical people survive betrayal. Idealists get destroyed by it." What happened to forgiveness? What happened to the man who taught me that everyone deserves second chances? That man discovered that some people don't deserve second chances. Some actions are so fundamentally destructive that consequences are the only appropriate response. Tess stared at him for a long moment, and Luke could see her mentally cataloging all the ways he changed since discovering Isabel's affair. "What happened to you? When did you become so cold and bitter?" "I became realistic about human nature. People are capable of anything when they want something badly enough. Trust is a luxury that practical people can't afford." "I don't know who you are anymore," Luke nodded. "I'm not sure I know either. But I'm someone who finishes what he starts, and I'm someone who makes sure actions have consequences." Tess drove back to Columbus with her Aunt Carol. Luke drove home alone to Indiana, to the house that felt enormous and empty, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. But but his work wasn't finished yet. The final phase of Jared's destruction played out over the following months with the inexorable efficiency of a well-designed system. The civil judgment was enforced, $500,000 in damages plus legal fees and court costs. Jared's house was sold at auction to pay the debt. His remaining assets were seized. His professional reputation was destroyed so thoroughly that he couldn't find work in construction, inspection, or any related field. Luke monitored the process with the same attention to detail he brought to complex installations. Every court filing, every asset transfer, every legal proceeding. He wanted to ensure that justice was complete and permanent. 6 months after Isabel's passing, Luke received an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Columbus Dispatch, an obituary for Jared Polk, age 47, who had been found dead in an efficiency apartment from an apparent pill overdose. No surviving family, no memorial service planned. There was also a handwritten note on lined paper. "You won, Luke. Congratulations. I hope it was worth destroying 3 lives to prove your point." Luke read the note twice, then burned it in his fireplace along with all the surveillance equipment, audio recordings, and photographic evidence he'd collected. He opened a beer and sat in his recliner, watching the flames consume the physical remnants of the worst year of his life. Had he won? His wife was dead. His daughter barely tolerated his presence, and his former best friend had destroyed himself with pills and despair. Luke had his justice, his legal vindication, his complete and total victory. But victory felt exactly like losing, only more final. The next morning, Luke's phone rang. Tess, calling from her aunt's house in Ohio. "I saw the news about Jared," she said without preamble. "Yeah, I saw it too." "How do you feel about it?" Luke thought carefully about the question. How did he feel? Satisfied, guilty, vindicated, empty? "I feel like it's over," he said finally. "Is it? Are you finished destroying people now?" Luke looked around his new house. He'd sold the family home and bought something smaller, more practical, easier to maintain. Everything was functional, efficient, temporary, like a place where someone was waiting for their real life to begin again. "Yeah," he said, "it's over." "Good, because I can't lose anyone else." Luke heard something in his daughter's voice that he hadn't heard since she was a child. Vulnerability, hope, the possibility of forgiveness. "Tess, I don't want to talk about what happened. I can't relitigate the past or judge whether what you did was right or wrong. But I need to know that you're done being the person you became during all of this." "I'm done," Luke said, and meant it. "I'm done with surveillance and lawsuits and revenge. I'm done being angry. Then maybe we can figure out how to be a family again. A smaller family, but still a family." "I'd like that." "It won't be easy. Trust is hard to rebuild, I know. But I'm good at difficult projects that take a long time to complete." For the first time in over a year, Tess laughed. It was a small sound, but genuine. "I'll call you next week," she said. "Maybe we can have dinner or something." After she hung up, Luke sat in his empty house and thought about the difference between justice and revenge. Justice was supposed to restore balance, to make things right, to repair what had been broken. Revenge just destroyed everything equally until nothing recognizable remained. He'd gotten his revenge. Complete, total, permanent revenge that had eliminated both Isabel and Jared from existence while leaving him victorious and alone. It was a lesson learned too late, paid for in full, and filed away in the same mental cabinet where Luke kept all his other hard-earned truths about the world. Sometimes good people did terrible things when pushed beyond their limits. Sometimes terrible things were necessary to survive betrayal. And sometimes, when all was said and done, being right was the loneliest victory of all. Luke finished his beer, put on his work clothes, and went to fix someone else's broken system. Because that's what he did. That's who he was. And for now, that's all he had left. But maybe with time and patience and the same systematic approach he brought to complex repairs, he could figure out how to rebuild something new from the wreckage. Something smaller and different, but functional. Maybe he could learn to be someone's father again, even if he could never again be someone's husband or friend. It was a project worth attempting. And Luke Mendez had always been very good at seeing difficult projects through to completion.